Now let's talk about managing our client-side state for the application. So we need a way to basically track all of the data from a smart contract on our client-side application inside this UI. So, we could list out the orders here, we could list out the trades here, et cetera, the price chart. But we need a way to manage all that in our client-side application. We don't want to just talk to our smart contract and, fetch everything anytime something changes, right? Anytime a new order is created, we just want it to automatically populate on the front end. So how do we do that? Well, we need some sort of state management protocol, and that's what we're going to use Redux for. So Redux is a predictable state container for JavaScript apps. And we're basically going to treat Redux almost like a little database, a database that lives inside of our React app, okay? And it's going to be a database that we build that's going to reflect our smart contract state. So, whenever we created the exchange and the token and all that, and I'll just show you. We're going to get all this data and put it on the client side. So go to source, contracts, exchange.sol. Remember, we built a way to get all the orders, right? So we have these mappings that say, here's all our orders, here's the order count, here's the filled orders, the canceled orders. We need to know all this information on the client side in order to build the exchange. And we're going to fetch all the orders and put them in a database on our client-side application or inside our client-side application. And that's exactly what we're going to use Redux for. So I'll give you an overview of how Redux works. Let's go to the Getting Started page. And we've already got Redux in our project. We added it to the package.json file. So basically, Redux has a few concepts. It's got a concept of a store. So the store is basically going to be like our database, and we'll be able to see it with these Redux dev tools that we installed in the dependencies section. And also, it relies upon this notion of a reducer, an action creator, and an action, and also a dispatcher. So let's talk about those things, all right? So an action in Redux is basically just saying that something happened. So in our case, an action might be that, we loaded Web3, right? So if you go back to our code and go to our app.js file, let's find that, components, app.js. So when we loaded Web3, we could basically tell our app that, Web3 loaded, right? That'd be an example of an action. This is similar like events or something like that if you're, using jQuery or some older JavaScript kind of conventions. And whenever an action is triggered, you basically create an action, right? So here you go. Here's an example of an action. So it's basically just a JavaScript object, and it's going to have a type, and we can optionally pass more data, which we'll see whenever we wire this up. So the type is going to be increment inside this example. So our type might be Web3 loaded, right? And what happens is we'll call dispatch on our store, all right? And the Redux store is going to know that something happened, all right? So you got this action and an action creator that will do this. It'll call dispatch, and it will pass in this action. And now Redux is going to run this action through something called a reducer. So here's an example of a Redux reducer. It's basically going to take the action and run it through this switch statement. And it's going to check the type, right? So we see these types, increment, decrement. And whenever that happens, we want to change the state of the Redux store. So in this case of a counter, whenever it was incremented, we take the state and we add 1, or take the state and -1. So that's essentially what happens. Whenever, for our case, our first little example will be whenever Web3 is loaded, we want to update the state, update our database essentially here on the client side that Web3 was loaded, and we want to check for that. And whenever it checks, we basically want to update the state to include the new Web3 connection that we just loaded. And we'll pass that in with some data in the action. So we're going to see all this in action. It's probably a little confusing at first, but just bear with me. That's how it's going to work, and it'll become more apparent as we implement it in our own project and then do this several times. Every time we do something new, we're going to have to create like a new action. It's going to get pretty repetitive, but you'll catch on pretty fast, okay? All right, so let's actually go to wire up Redux in our application. We've already got it installed in our package.json file, like I mentioned. I'm going to take this console log statement out. But there are a few files that we need. So first what we'll do in our project is create a basic reducer. And that's what you see here, all right? This is going to handle any new actions that have occurred in our application, and it's going to update the application state, all right? So I'm going to put everything Redux related inside of a store directory. So it'll be in here, so source, store. So we're going to have ABIs, components, contracts, and store. All right, so I'll make the new directory like this. Say mkdir source store. All right, and I'm going to create a new file, source store, and I'll call this reducers. Okay. All right, so I'll open this. And inside of here, we want to import a function from Redux. So let's create our first reducer. Okay, so let's go back to this. We can say function counter. This is an example. I'm just going to copy this from the documentation. All right, so I'll do this. I'll paste it in. And we're not going to use a counter. We're going to say web3. So the first thing we want to do is basically handle all of our web3 actions. So whenever we load blockchain data, we're going to trigger some, actions, and that's going to run through this reducer, and we'll, handle those, and we'll add data to our store. So like whenever the account's loaded, we'll add the account to the store. Whenever, a smart contract's loaded, we'll add that to the store, et cetera, et cetera. So inside of here, I'm going to kill this and say state equals this empty object. All right. And I'm going to take out these initial caches and just do a default. So for now, we'll just return the state anytime something happens. We're not going to check for anything. We're just going to create a boilerplate reducer. So that's all. It's just a function that's got a switch statement inside of it that accepts a state object, and an action, and it's going to evaluate the action based on the type and, update the state, which we'll build out later. All right, so that's our basic reducer. Now, we could use that, but we're going to add more reducers. So we're going to silo or organize different actions. So like Web3 is going to be in one reducer. We're going to have a special reducer for our exchange and a special reducer for our orders in the future. Sorry, for our token in the future. So we're going to need to actually put these reducers together. So I'm going to use a function from Redux called combine reducers, and I'm going to import it like this. Okay. So what I'll do is actually create a root reducer that combines all the reducers together. Say const root reducer equals combine reducers, and this will be a function. All right, that'll accept this object, and I'll say export default root reducer. All right. And inside of here, we want to return any reducers that we include. So for now, I'm going to say web3, and this will be web3. Okay, so that'll be all the reducers. And if you're new to ES6, we can just do this like this. Boom. All right, so that's it. It's just an object, and this is short in ES6 for key with the same value. All right, so we do this for short. All right, so that is how we create our first reducer, and we will revisit this file multiple times to continue building this out, but that'll get us started. All right, so now we want to create a new file to configure the Redux store. We've got our first reducer, and we want to do some of the stuff that we saw in this documentation. Like we want to create the store. We want to add it. We add some behavior to it. So I'll show you how to do that right now. We'll create a new file inside of here. Let's see, relative to current view. And we're going to call this configure store. So configure store. And what we want to do inside of here is basically add some middleware and create the store that's going to be attached to our application. All right, the first thing we want to do is create a store like this. So we can see store equals create store, and that passes in the counter reducer. So this would be the first step. We'll just copy this, paste in here like that. That's kind of our first basic concept. But inside, I want to say const store, and I want to create the store, and I want to pass in a different reducer. I want to pass in, this root reducer that we are combining reducers with. So I'll say create store, let's see here, root reducer. But we have to import this. So let's import root reducer from reducers. All right, that's this file right here. All right, so additionally, so that'll just give us this basic store. And we want to do a few more things inside here. So we want to make sure we also import, create store. So we're going to import, let's see, create store. This would be from Redux. All right. Then we'll export it like this. We'll say export default function configure store. Oops. It's the same name as the file. And we'll just pass in store. So we'll return it. Okay, so this will be all this. And I guess we could, do this. Let's say return store like this, create store. And also, I believe I need to do this, say preloaded state. This is just something that comes with, that we're going to see momentarily. Let's see here, preloaded state. Now what I want to do is create some middleware that shows us actions that are triggered anytime something happens in our app, okay? And we'll see it logged to our console. Basically, anytime actions are triggered, we'll see some output here that'll show us that information. And we'll be able to interact with Redux DevTools. We can get all that for free. So I'll do that like this. I need to import a few files here. We're going to import apply middleware. And then compose. Okay. And then we're also going to do import, let's see here, create logger from Redux logger. All right, so that's our next item. So we'll add the logger like this. We'll say const logger middleware equals create logger. And then const middleware. This is going to be any other middleware we decide to add. And then what I'm going to do is wire up Redux DevTools to also connect to our application. So I'll say this is for Redux DevTools. Const compose enhancers. So Redux DevTools has already attached a value to window for us, and this is just from their documentation. I'm not a genius or anything. I just pulled this. So basically, window.redux DevTools extension compose, or the default compose that comes with Redux. Okay, so this is going to allow us to connect to our app. All right. So what I'm going to do is put all this together. Say compose enhancers, and then I'm going to put this as apply middleware. All right, and then we're going to say middleware, and then logger middleware. All right, so this might have been a little complicated. You don't have to understand how every single part of this works. Just know that this is a nice setup that I like for configuring Redux for development. And you can basically just copy and paste this if you want to. But I just showed you how to configure your Redux store the way I like to. Okay, so now I don't think we have any issues. Let's pull this into this index.js file to actually attach our store that we just created to our application. So first, we'll go up here and we'll import configure store. Do it like this. We'll just say import configure store from store configure store. All right, that's the first step. And then next, we need to import some other libraries from Redux. So say import, or for Redux, I should say, render from React DOM. And then we also want to import provider from React Redux. While I'm here, I'm going to remove these semicolons. I don't like to use a bunch of semicolons. You're welcome to use them if you'd like to, but I'm going to take them off. Okay, so that should be all the requirements that we need. So I can attach our Redux store to our app, right? So Redux basically relies on this notion of a provider, okay? And the provider is going to get wrapped, it's going to wrap this app whenever we render the DOM, okay? So what I'm going to do is say const store equals configure store. All right, that's exactly what we did inside of here. Export default configure store. We're going to call that function here. Let's just make sure we're not breaking anything yet. All right, looks like everything's good so far. Got some linter warnings, but that's okay. And then we're going to basically create something called a Redux provider, which we just imported here. And that's going to basically expose our store to our app, okay? So I'll do that like this. Basically, we got React DOM render. I'm going to break this out and do this. Okay, so now instead of app, I'm going to say provider. All right, and then escape that. And then I'll put this app inside of there. So we're just going to wrap our app with this provider. All right, and the Redux provider needs to know about a store. So we'll say store. And you can refactor this. You could say like, configure store and just put it inside of here. That would also work. Okay, and that should be it. We should have Redux talking to our application. Let's go to our client side and see if he works, if he broke anything. All right, so we don't have any issues. We've got, some linter warnings, but we have no errors. And we can see our Redux DevTools actually turned green. So that means it's working and it knows about it. So we can click that and we can see that it was actually initialized. So Redux DevTools is a really handy extension. We're going to use it pretty heavily whenever we develop this project. We're going to look at our state. We can see the diff, all that kind of stuff. But for now, we know that it's working because we don't see any errors here, and we see a green Redux DevTools. So that's really nice. All right, so we've got Redux set up. I'm going to clean up some of these linter errors while we're here. So basically, in index.js, render was imported but never used. So yeah, I can see that. I imported that thinking I would call render by itself, but I'm just going to do React DOM render. Makes things a little easier. All right, so that's done. And then we just see that we have some variables defined inside of here that aren't being used, but that's okay. We're about to refactor this anyway, so I'm going to let those live, and we'll move on to the next step. All right, now let's actually add some of this data to our application. Okay, it's to the Redux store. So, we loaded all this up. Let's actually put some of this in Redux. The first thing we're going to do is basically just put this Web3 connection, the entire thing, inside the Redux store, okay? So what I'm going to propose we do first is create an action to do this, all right? So let's create a new file. We'll do it inside the store directory. So we'll say touch source store, and we'll say actions. All right. And now what we want to do is create a new action. So if you go back to, this documentation, we can see an action looks like this. And it's got a type, and it can optionally have more data. And we're going to handle actions inside the reducer. Okay. So the first action I'm going to create is basically just said that Web3, loaded. Say function Web3 loaded. And then I'll say pass in the connection. And that's just going to return an action. So we'll say type Web3 loaded. And we'll say connection. And just as a reminder, this is the same thing as saying connection equals connection. Okay. So this is just shorthand. All right, that's it. That's a basic Redux action. That's all it is. So we want to access this from another file. So we'll say export function. And then we'll be able to import it from another file. So now what we want to do is actually trigger this. And I'm going to create a new file here. We're going to call it interactions. We can see it was created here inside the store directory. So this interactions file is going to basically handle all of our blockchain interactions. We'll create new functions inside of here. Like, for example, we're going to store like this essentially inside of our interactions file, and it'll handle, doing this on the blockchain and then also updating Redux and stuff like that. So I will do it like this. So I'm going to create a new function inside of interactions. Let's say export const load web3. And this will accept an argument. It's going to be called dispatch. I'll show you what that is in just a second. So dispatch comes from Redux. We see it here. We need store.dispatch. And it's a function. It basically just means that we want to trigger an action and dispatch it with Redux. And whenever dispatch is called, it's going to get injected inside of, one of these reducers that we're creating. And the reducer will handle that action and update the state. All right, so inside of here, I'm going to say, I'm basically going to load this. I'm going to copy this, put it inside of here. I'll say const connection equals new web3, right? Just like we did. And actually, we just leave web3. That's fine. And we'll say dispatch. And we're going to say web3 loaded. And we'll say connection. Or web3, sorry. Web3. And then lastly, we're just going to return it. All right. So this function, web3 loaded, is going to come from this actions file here. So we'll pull it in. Say import web3 loaded from store actions. Okay, so I'm going to do this broken up like this because we're going to add a bunch of imports from the same file. And, it's a lot easier just to read them vertically like this. So I'm going to get us started by doing it like that. All right, so we pull that in, we dispatch it, and we return it. So the dispatch is going to tell Redux that it was loaded, and we're going to, basically, let's see here, we're going to send this action, basically to Redux. And it's going to contain the data of Web3 that we just fetched. So let's dispatch that. Go to our app.js file. instead of this, we'll say const web3 equals load web3, and we'll pass in some arguments. All right. So first of all, we need load web3, so we can import that like this. We'll say import load web3 from interactions. And we need an additional argument, right? So if we go here, we can see that we need dispatch. Okay. So where does dispatch come from? Well, Redux automatically includes it in your props whenever you have wired it up for your application. So I'll explain that. React components have something called props or properties, which get passed down, and we can get them inside of really any of these functions. Like render will have props available, and component will mount will have props available. So we can get dispatch out of those props like this. So this .props is available inside of component will mount. It's also available inside of render, which we'll see. And we can just read dispatch from it, dispatch. Okay. So we can just copy this and pass it down with load blockchain data. Or we could just do, yeah, that's what I want to do. And we'll say dispatch, and we'll pass in dispatch. All right, so hopefully that worked. Let's go back to our browser and check. All right, so we got a little bit of an issue. So it can't find interactions. So that's going to be in store. So store. All right, let's see what happened now. All right, so web3 is not defined. So inside of interactions, we need to actually import web3. So say import web3 from web3. All right, save that. All right, you got another issue. So can't resolve store interactions. This is going to be from the store file. All right, or sorry, it's going to be from, let's see here. Oh, I see what it is. We're trying to load actions from store. We're already inside store, so let's just do this. All right, there we go. So we removed those errors, but it looks like we have a new error. Let's see what the issue is. So type error, dispatch is not a function. Let's see what's going on there. All right, so now what's happening. Basically, our component doesn't know about Redux yet, in one sense. So what we need to do is actually connect our component to part of Redux, essentially the store. So what we do is go to the bottom here, right before we export the app, and we're going to do something called map state to props. So in order to get dispatch from the props, we have to add it to props. So I'll show you how to do that right now. We'll say this. So basically, I'll paste this in here. Add some extra space so you guys can see. Like this. Take this out. So this is the magic. Basically, we say map state to props. We define a function that does that. And then we pass in the state. And we're going to add some information here later. All right, just trust me on this. But for now, we're going to create this function. And we're going to pass it into a function called connect. And connect is really what does the magic of connecting our app to Redux, or this component to Redux, to get the information inside of props. Okay. So that's going to be the magic. So we need to import connect, and we do it just like this. We'll import it from the React Redux library, which we installed with npm in our package.json file. We'll say import connect from React-Redux. Okay, all right, so we'll do that, save it, kill this dead space, go back to the browser, refresh. Well, it's already refreshing for us. All right, so there we go. Web3 was loaded. So if you look at your console here, you can see this nice logged output. An action was triggered. Web3 loaded. So this came from, let's see, index.js. Let's see here, configure store. Remember, we did this, right? And we also did this logger middleware. So basically, we allowed Redux logger to show us anytime an action was triggered, okay? That's where this is coming from. And we can go to Redux DevTools and see the action listed here. So Web3 was loaded. And we can see that it didn't change the state yet. We're gonna configure that in a second, but it's at least picking up the actions. It's detecting it. All right. So now what we want to do is actually update our Redux state. We can see our entire state object. We've got a default key here for Web3, which we configured inside the reducer, but we don't have any data in it yet. So let's actually do that. So let's go to our reducers file, and we have this, key Web3 only, right? We see it here, Web3. That's there because we defined it inside this file, right? So this is the same as saying Web3. Right, that's why we see that. But what we want to do is actually handle this action. So whenever the data gets triggered, or whenever Web3 loaded gets triggered, we want to handle it inside of here. So I'll do that just like this. So before default, I'll say case quotation Web3 initialized or loaded. And I'll put a colon, say return, and we're going to update the state. So we did that with the ES6 like this, say ... state. So this is going to return a new object that takes existing state and it basically extends it. So connection action dot connection. Actually, this was let's call this connection. So if we go back to our reducers, I want to update this to use the connection naming. So this is really important that you do this. Let's see here. Actions. Let's call this, connection. We did call it connection. All right, cool. So that's what you need. All right, let's save that. And so basically, when the action comes in, it's going to handle Web3 loaded. It's going to update the state and give us a connection key with the actual Web3 connection. All right, so do that. And there we go. We can see the state. Web3 connection, boom, connection, and that's the entire object that was logged to the console before. Awesome. So additionally, we can see the diff. We can see what changed whenever this action was triggered. So we can see a connection was added, and we'll notice that as we continue on through the project. All right. Now let's go ahead and add the rest of this stuff to Redux. All right, we're going to add it to the store. We want to, track the network ID, the accounts, the token, etc., etc. All right, we'll go ahead and do it like this. We'll kind of do it one by one. Let's detect the account, the token, and the exchange. That's what we'll load for now. So let's go inside of here, and I'm going to create some actions. First, let's load the account. Say const, let's say export. Actually, let's just copy this to save ourselves some time. Let's get Web3 loaded. Let's say Web3 account loaded. Web3 account loaded, and we'll pass in the account. We're going to be doing this a lot through the tutorial, so I'm going to be copy and pasting quite a bit just to save time. I'm sure you could, have some sort of shortcut in your editor that would bootstrap this for you, but I'm just going to copy and paste to avoid confusion. All right, so Web3 account loaded, and in order to do that, we want to create an interaction. So we'll do interactions, and we'll import, you'll see why I'm doing this on multiple lines right now, Web3 account loaded. All right, so let's copy this, paste this, load account, and we'll pass in dispatch, and we'll also pass in Web3 because we need that. I'll see this first argument. Yeah, I'll see Web3 as the first argument and dispatch as the second. All right, so inside of here, what we're going to do is basically copy this and say accounts, all right? And then we'll say accounts equals await Web3, ETH get accounts. All right, and then we're just going to take the first one. Say const account equals accounts 0. All right, and then we're going to dispatch Web3 account loaded. And that's what we created here, Web3 account loaded. And we imported it. All right, and then this time we're going to return the account. Now we need to handle the account loaded. We can do that inside the Web3 reducer. We'll just add a new case, and we'll basically just say, you know, case Web3 account loaded, colon, say return, dot, 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 state, and then account. Give the action account. All right. So we can go back to our app.js file and say load web3. We can also load, what we call this, load account. All right, from store interactions. And instead of, you know, account here, we can just say await load account. All right. So let's see here, refresh this, and we got some issues. So cannot use await outside the async function. Let's see what happened here. All right, so it looks like we didn't make this an async function, so we'll do that right now. We'll say const equals async. All right, save that. Okay, so we got some issues here still. Can't read ETH of undefined. All right, so we got to pass web3 in. So when we load the account, we need to give it web3, which we have here. And we also have dispatch. All right, save that. Let it refresh on its own. All right, and there we go. We can see the web3 account was loaded. All right, and we should see it reflected in the state as well, because we created the reducer, or we updated the reducer. So web3 account loaded. Here's the diff. It put the account in there. All right, so it looks like that's wrong. It put the entire web3 connection in there. Awesome. So let's update that. So let's see here. So let's change this in interactions. Web3. So instead of web3, yeah, we're passing web3 in here. We really want to pass in the account. My fault. So let this refresh. There we go. Here's the actual account. Awesome. Here's our account that we're connected with to the blockchain. So now let's add our token smart contract that we saw in here. Let's do this. So first, we're going to create a new action that loads the token or handles token loading. So I'm going to do that like this. Basically, we're going to create one that says token loaded. Let's just copy this. Token loaded. And this is going to be the contract. All right. And then let's handle this in the interactions. Go back to interactions. And I'm going to create a new function that basically says export const load token equals async. And pass in web3 network ID. And then dispatch. All right, and we want to return the token. So say const token equals web3 dot, we'll just do this. Basically say token. Same thing. So we're going to refactor this probably a little more later, but let's just pass in. All right, so we need to get the token actually. So instead of loading the token from here, let's do it in this interactions file. So just down here, say import token from, all right, ABIs, yep, token. All right. So then we'll just say return. And we're going to update this more later, but this will just get us started. Actually, tell you what, let's go ahead and do it. Let's create a way to check for MetaMask. So we'll say try. and then catch error. And then basically we will do this in here. Say const token equals this. And then we'll dispatch the token. And I'm going to import this, or this be token loaded actually. Okay, and then if that works, we'll return the token. And if there's an error, we basically want to, you know, tell the console, or maybe even the window. We could say window.alert. Token contract not deployed, or just we'll say contract. Contract not deployed to the current network. All right. So that will work. All right. So, and then we'll just return null. Okay. Now we can load the token like this. We can just say token. Let's just do it like this. Let's say load token. All right. And then we will say token equals load token. Load token. And we need to pass in some arguments, right? We need to pass in Web3. Oops. Web3. The network ID. And we need to pass in dispatch. I think that'll work. Let's just check the browser. All right, so we cannot read total supply when defined. That's fine, but we saw token was loaded, so let's take this out. All right, let's see what happens. Okay, token was loaded. We saw the action was dispatched. So we want to handle token loading with a reducer, but we don't want to do it inside this Web3 reducer. We actually want to create a new reducer for the token itself. All right, we're going to create one for all of our other smart contracts as well. So I'm going to create a new one that looks just like this that handles that action. All right, I'm just going to paste it in like this. Boom. So token, whenever the token is loaded, we basically are just going to handle that. I'm going to put quotation marks around this. Token loaded, we're going to update the state, and the contract is going to be the action contract. All right, we're going to combine reducers and say token. All right, there we go. So back to our app.js file, make sure everything's working. Go to the browser. Boom, there we go, token was loaded. Let's check the Redux store. All right, token was loaded. Let's see the state at this point. So here's the diff, all right? We can see the token namespace. Here's the contract. So let's see the whole state. Now we got Web3 stuff inside here. Here's the connection. Here's the account. And then here's the token. Boom, here's the whole smart contract loaded up inside here. All right, that's really awesome. So we're going to have access to these throughout our project. Now, let's get a connection to our Exchange smart contract as well. We'll do that pretty much just like we did the token. So we'll start with an action. We'll basically just say, you know, Exchange loaded. So these will be token. This will be Web3. Oops. Web3. Sorry, I can't type today. And then let's see here, Exchange. So I'm going to just copy this and say, you know, Exchange loaded. Exchange loaded. All right. Go to reducers, do the same thing. Just like token, we will do Exchange. All right, Exchange. And then we'll add Exchange down here. Okay. And then, so we got actions, we got reducers. We need an interaction to do this. We'll basically create one to load the Exchange. All right, so I'm just gonna give ourselves some space so you can see this. I'm gonna use the token as a reference point. Say load exchange. Web3 network ID dispatch, so exchange instead of token. You can certainly refactor this if you'd like to reduce some of this duplication. I can leave that to you as an exercise, but I'll just get you started. So exchange, web3.eth contract, and instead of token, we want exchange. All right, and that'll return the exchange, and then it'll handle errors. And also, we want to import the exchange. So import token, import exchange. And this is going to allow us to read the exchange on any network that it's deployed to from our project. All right. So I'll remove this space. And then go back to app.js, and we'll import load exchange. And I'm going to actually do this. I'm going to break these lines up just to make this a little more readable. It's going to start getting big. And I will load the exchange here. Just do load exchange. Web3 network ID and dispatch. All right, let's check the app. All right, there we go. Let's see here. Oh, I called it the wrong action. Sorry, let's go back to our reducers. Let's see here. I think and that's in the interactions. Yeah, I forgot to do exchange loaded. So exchange loaded, not token loaded. Sorry. All right, so exchange loaded is not defined. We need to import it. And then say exchange loaded. All right, let this reload. There we go. Exchange is loaded. Let's see if it actually exists in the state. Go to the Redux DevTools and look at the state. So exchange is loaded. Here's the diff. Here's the exchange. Here's the contract. Let's look at the entire state. Web3 token exchange. There we go. Contract. Boom. All right. So we have successfully hydrated our Redux store with a bunch of useful data. We've hydrated it with our Web3 connection, our account, our smart contracts. We've done a lot of heavy lifting for the setup in our project. And we're going to use these patterns that we've implemented to start really building out each part of our cryptocurrency exchange. So that's it for this video. Hop into the next section where we're going to talk about reading information out of the state and using it in our app so we can start filling in these sections for our exchange. All right, so I'll catch you in that next video.